Hey there everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving deep into some truly disturbing Reddit horror stories. You guys have been absolutely loving these horror compilations, and honestly, I've been having a blast bringing them to you. These long-form story videos are just so captivating, creepy, weird, and like the title promises, genuinely disturbing. So these stories are going to be incredible, and you'll definitely want to stick around for all of them. I just want to say a massive thank you for being here. It truly means everything. Please hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and follow me on Instagram and Spotify. Yeah, this video is going to run long, so without wasting any more time, let's jump straight into some disturbing Reddit horror stories. The Neighbor Below, written by Crawling Dread 422. After 29 years of living in the same apartment building, I can honestly say that having a night owl as a neighbor is one of the most frustrating experiences imaginable. Unfortunately for me, one moved into the unit directly beneath mine at the beginning of September. It was a man who appeared to have an unlimited collection of belongings that absolutely had to be organized the second he moved in. Every single night at 10:15 p.m. precisely, he would begin either hammering something, drilling into walls, or dragging heavy furniture across his floor, consistently achieving the volume of a construction site at rush hour. I've always been sensitive to sounds, so being woken up at night isn't exactly new to me. There's constant noise in the city, whether it's drunk people shouting at ungodly hours or stray cats fighting in the alleyways. Believe me, the number of times I've been jolted awake by a raccoon tipping over a dumpster behind my building is absurd. The difference is, these disruptions were always random and short-lived. I could roll over and drift back to sleep relatively easily. But ever since this guy moved in below me, my nights have been filled with his relentless chaos. The symphony of destruction would continue every evening for roughly 3 to 4 nights consecutively. Then eventually, I'd hear a heavy dragging sound, suggesting he'd pulled out another massive box of items that required immediate attention. This pattern trapped me in a vicious cycle of sleep deprivation. I'd finally fall asleep late and wake up feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. I'd have to pour myself a gallon of coffee just to function at work, praying I could catch up on rest later that evening. And yes, I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I just confront him? I didn't want to come across as some bitter, angry tenant. Plus, I genuinely hate confrontation. I've always felt terrible whenever I've had to call someone out. I also had no idea what his name was, which somehow made the thought of knocking on his door even more uncomfortable. So I just sat in my apartment, waiting for the madness to end. Suddenly, 4 weeks had flown by, and he showed absolutely no signs of finishing whatever project he was working on. Things reached a breaking point on a particularly sweltering evening in late September, an evening so oppressively hot that I had to leave every window in my apartment wide open just to breathe. Right on schedule, the neighbor below started his nightly routine. It was just as deafening as every other night. I tossed and turned in bed, pressing my pillow against my ears like I'd done countless times before. But tonight felt different. The heat combined with my exhaustion and those god-awful sounds from downstairs merged into a skull-splitting headache. It felt like my brain was expanding, threatening to burst through my skull just to escape the noise. I'd reached my limit. I sat upright in bed, filled my lungs with as much air as they could hold, and screamed at the top of my voice, "Shut the hell up!" My outburst was immediately followed by a loud crash from below. He must have just opened another box, I thought bitterly. I couldn't believe it. There's no way he didn't hear that. My scream was so loud, I'm pretty sure people on the 8th floor heard it. I stared down at my floor, bracing myself for the troublemaker and his orchestra of hell to resume. I waited and waited some more. Time crawled by, but no more sounds came from the apartment below. Maybe he actually heard me. Maybe he was finally showing some consideration. I felt my migraine begin to fade as I lowered myself back down onto my mattress. I closed my eyes, allowing my exhaustion to pull me toward sleep. I was undisturbed for the first time in what felt like forever. I woke up with the sunrise several hours later, and I didn't need to mainline a pot of coffee just to keep my eyes open. I went to work actually smiling, feeling good in my own skin. Everything seemed easier. I was genuinely happy. It was paradise compared to the nightmare I'd been living. I came home that evening desperately hoping the previous night wasn't just a fluke. If only I'd been that fortunate. After darkness fell, activity in the downstairs apartment resumed. This time, however, the sounds were distinctly different. All I could hear was thump, 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 repeated endlessly. I couldn't identify what was making the noise. It didn't match any tool I was familiar with. The intervals between sounds were inconsistent, sometimes 5 seconds, sometimes 10. They definitely weren't footsteps. The gaps were too large for that. It wasn't a hammer either. The sounds were far too muted. This internal debate consumed me as I lay in bed that night, my exhausted eyes locked on the ceiling. Maybe he's tapping his foot to music, but the rhythm doesn't match any song. Maybe he's bouncing a ball over and over, but why would anyone do that? Is he training to be a basketball player? No, that's ridiculous. These were just some of the theories spinning through my mind as the sounds persisted in the background. I didn't fall asleep until well past 2 in the morning. When I finally woke up, the noises had ceased. I assumed he'd simply resumed working on his apartment during daylight hours. Throughout my entire shift at work and the commute home, I silently begged the universe that I wouldn't hear those sounds again tonight, even though they were quieter than his usual construction symphony. There was something deeply unsettling about not being able to identify their source. To my horror, the noises started up again as soon as the moon rose. Thump, thump, thump. Lying in bed that night, I was clenching my jaw so hard from pure frustration. I buried my head under my pillow again, but it was pointless. I could still hear the sounds regardless of how hard I tried to block them out. They made me feel like someone was continuously jabbing at my brain, reshaping it like modeling clay. Maybe this was payback. Maybe he was furious about my yelling and was doing this deliberately to drive me insane. Maybe he wanted to torture me with his antics. I desperately tried to fall asleep, but it simply wasn't happening. The sounds from downstairs reverberated in my head, somehow even louder than any of the noise from previous weeks. It was absolute torture. My heart nearly stopped when my phone suddenly rang. I cautiously grabbed it, wondering who the hell was calling at this hour. "Hello?" I mumbled hoarsely. "Anderson, where the fuck are you, man? We've been waiting for you for nearly an hour." "Oh, hey boss. Sorry, but my shift doesn't start until..." I glanced toward my window. Rays of sunlight were already streaming through and illuminating my floor. "Shit. Sorry, boss. I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said as I scrambled out of bed and ended the call. What followed was hands down one of the absolute worst days of my entire existence. I was essentially a walking zombie with only one obsessive thought consuming my mind. What the hell are those sounds? I eventually dragged myself home and had zero interest in relaxing. Relaxation wasn't even on my radar. All I wanted, all I could focus on, was waiting for those sounds. I planted myself on my couch, eyes fixed on the floor, and like clockwork, the commotion started up again late that evening. Thump, thump, thump. I couldn't endure another night of this. It was genuine torture. I no longer cared what he thought of me. I no longer cared about having to confront someone. I stormed out my door, down the stairs, and pounded on his door with my fist. "What the hell is your problem?" I shouted. The sound stopped immediately, but I wasn't satisfied. I knew they'd start again the moment I left. I wasn't falling for that. I reached down, turned the doorknob, and pushed my way inside. His apartment was cold as a tomb and dead silent. I walked cautiously into the living area, and that's where I discovered him. He was lying on his back at the base of a small step stool. He lay next to the sharp corner of a wooden coffee table. The corner was coated in a mixture of dried dark blood and strands of gray hair. The side of his head had a gaping crater of blood, hair, fragments of skull, and brain tissue. Both of his arms were mangled down to exposed bone. A swarm of flies had made a nest on his corpse. The windows in the living room were thrown wide open, allowing the September breeze to blow through and carry away any stench of decomposition that should have been overwhelming. As I stood there processing the horrific scene, I heard a skittering noise. I watched in complete disbelief as a plump little shape emerged from one of the unpacked boxes on the floor, where it had obviously been hiding from all the noise I'd made. It was a raccoon, currently oblivious to my presence. It crawled across the body and began gnawing on the hand. Every time the raccoon tore off a piece of flesh, the hand was lifted slightly into the air before dropping back down to the floor, producing a soft thump. I haven't slept. Since 2024, written by Nightshade Tales. He writes incredible stories on Reddit, so definitely check out his page. And now, into the story. Growing up, I faced two distinct paths in life. I could follow my father's footsteps and become an auto mechanic. It was stable work with decent income, but I always experienced this overwhelming sense of dread whenever I passed by his garage. It was this massive warehouse painted in a faded yellow color, and I constantly had this nagging feeling that if I stayed there too long, that place would consume me entirely. So I chose the other path, my mother's path. She was always larger than life itself and expected me to be the same. She was the definition of hustle culture. When she and my father separated, she took me and my brother across the state to Los Angeles. She embodied the phrase, "no pain, no gain," which roughly translates to suffering now for rewards later. She would accept any job at any time and claw her way upward through sheer determination. My brother and I developed the same mentality. We would work, study, and network simultaneously. We were expected to excel at everything at once: intelligent, physically fit, culturally aware, and strongly opinionated. I studied software engineering at night while working food delivery during the day. I developed excellent skills at navigating traffic so I could zip around the city without constantly fearing for my life. That's much harder than it sounds. Traffic regulations around here feel more like polite suggestions than actual laws. I also took on freelance gigs, building websites for friends, relatives, and business contacts, which consumed most of my weekend evenings. And finally, there was the one responsibility that never paid a single dollar: protecting my brother. My brother, Marcus, worked as a nightclub promoter in downtown LA. He primarily worked weekends and late nights, and I'm the only person he trusted to watch his back. If someone harassed him, I'd get the call. If he needed an emergency ride home, I'd get the call. I'd get screamed at for being late, for not responding quickly enough, or for 1,000 other reasons. It was by far the most exhausting job I'd ever undertaken. But family is family, right? I worked so intensely that the only time my friends ever saw me was when I showed up to pick up Marcus. They started calling me Nightfall or Closer, phrases you'd use when it's time to shut everything down for the evening. I was the closing time guy. When I appeared, everyone knew the party was ending. Not exactly the coolest nickname to carry around in your mid-20s. When my mother died from liver cancer in 2021, I'd just turned 23. I found myself in a position where I had to financially support both myself and my brother. Sure, Marcus contributed his share, but he was focused on his future. He wanted to pursue sound engineering, particularly for film and television production. That required significant money and time investment. So for an extended period, I had an enormous amount of responsibility suddenly dropped on my shoulders. Education, work, more work, and being available for Marcus around the clock. I barely slept, and when I did manage to sleep, I'd wake up at the slightest disturbance. I'd become so accustomed to sleeping lightly, constantly waiting for Marcus to call needing a pickup. But I didn't have many alternatives. I had to push forward for everyone's sake. So I developed a strategy. I just needed to survive until I completed my degree. I searched for temporary solutions to my exhaustion problem. I tried caffeine pills, but they absolutely destroyed my stomach. I experimented with this energy shot from a local convenience store, but that stuff nearly gave me heart palpitations. I didn't want to mess with anything stronger, so I basically gave up hope. Then, I met this guy named Marcus. Wait, I mean a guy named Devin. Devin was a decent person mixed up in some questionable business ventures, approximately 12 years older than me, but seemed 40 years older in spirit. To this day, I'm still not entirely sure what he actually does for a living. Besides co-owning a few downtown nightclubs, I'm pretty sure he imports goods from places he probably shouldn't. Some kind of gray market entrepreneur. He was a partial owner of a club where Marcus worked on weekends. The first time I encountered him, he was lounging outside the club with an ice-cold beer, smoking a cigarette. He didn't look like ownership, so I sat down beside him to re-tie my shoelace. He looked me over carefully. "You just gonna sit down like that?" he asked. "You got a reservation?" "I need a reservation for a bench," I replied. "For my bench?" "Yeah." "You the owner?" "I'm an owner, yeah." I was far too exhausted to care about social niceties, and honestly, getting Marcus fired from that place would have actually simplified my life. So I met his gaze directly. "You don't look like an owner to me." I genuinely didn't know if he was going to punch me or offer me a job, but he burst out laughing and offered me a cigarette, so I guess I made the right impression. I ended up spending 1 or 2 evenings per week at Devin's club. He offered me employment, but the compensation was pathetic, and I was already overloaded with commitments. I literally didn't have enough hours in the day to work for him. Looking back, that was probably fortunate. He was a great person to hang around, but he must have been an absolutely terrible boss. Cheap son of a bitch. Devin did have genuine sympathy for my situation, though. I was grinding hard to survive, and he respected the dedication. He threw me occasional side opportunities. For instance, collecting abandoned debit cards from ATMs. There's this particular type of ATM that takes an extremely long time to return cards. Many tourists assume the machine swallowed their card, so they just abandon it there. Devin paid me a small amount for each card I could retrieve, so I'd walk around collecting them while waiting for Marcus to finish his shift. Every little bit helped financially. We formed a solid friendship. I'd arrive roughly an hour before Marcus needed pickup just to spend time with Devin. We'd typically discuss movies, cars, women, whatever random topics came to mind. I didn't have many people in my life I could just talk about absolutely nothing with, and I suspected he didn't either. We'd usually end up drinking a beer and chewing tobacco. It's this leaf you wrap around tobacco and chew on. It gives you a stimulant boost that makes your mouth tingle and burn. It perfectly summarized Devin. Legal, but with a kick. Things took an unexpected turn when I received an invitation to one of his private gatherings. You see, I'd been awake for 31 hours straight at that point. I'd been grinding through a massive project for my software engineering class, and I'd been hoping to squeeze in a few extra hours at the delivery company. Plus, a client desperately needed me to rebuild their website after it got hacked. It was a perfect storm of countless small emergencies all hitting simultaneously, and it pushed me to complete exhaustion. But I still made it to Devin's party. He owned this beautiful house outside the city. He'd invited people from the club along with various business associates. He threw these gatherings roughly once every 6 months. It was his way of showing appreciation and flexing a little. Devin had really gone all out this time. He felt bad seeing me work myself to death, and he'd brought someone there from a pharmaceutical research company. They were looking for people for a clinical trial participation, and he thought it might interest me. The problem was, I looked so exhausted, I appeared to be on hardcore drugs. I didn't even comprehend the guy was offering me paid participation. As the party wound down, Devin pulled me aside for a private conversation. We chewed some tobacco, and he removed his sunglasses. The man rarely made direct eye contact, so I immediately knew something significant was happening. "I'm worried about you," he said seriously. "You're working yourself into an early grave." "Ah, I appreciate that," I responded. "It's not that I don't value your concern, but I just have so much that needs to get done." "Then tell me," he pressed. "Tell me how I can actually help you." "You don't need to do anything," I insisted. "I'm just grateful to have a real friend, you know?" I could practically see the wheels spinning in his head. His eyes got slightly watery. He gave me a tight hug and led me out to the balcony overlooking the city lights. He patted my back firmly. "You deserve better than this," he said with conviction. "I'm going to get you something better." The following weekend, I received a text from Devin. He was enthusiastic about showing me something. He frequently had things to share, but this time felt distinctly different. I was slightly anxious about meeting him, but it was a welcome change of pace from my usual routine. So that Saturday evening, I headed into the club. I walked straight past the bouncer, through the crowded dance floor, and into the restricted back areas. From there, I navigated a hallway to a cramped office at the rear of the building. After everything I'd seen from Devon, I expected something more impressive, but it was just a tiny office containing an outdated laptop, a small desk fan, a couple of folding chairs, and a cheap television mounted in the corner, all decorated with some early 2010s posters of women in bikinis posing with motorcycles. Devon was grinning from ear to ear and gestured for me to come closer. He opened a lockbox beneath his desk and extracted a small container of white pill bottles. They were all factory sealed and unmarked, except for a tiny purple lotus flower printed on each cap. He sat me down and pulled out one bottle from his jacket pocket to show me. "This is going to help you," he said confidently. "Trust me on this." "I don't mess with drugs, man," I said cautiously. "I know you don't. This isn't that kind of thing." He showed me his phone displaying a conversation he'd had with the guy from the party, the one from the pharmaceutical research company. Apparently, he'd managed to acquire several cases of an experimental wakefulness agent. "I've been trying it myself," he said. "Going on 3 weeks now. It's genuinely life-changing." "What exactly does it do? What's the catch?" I asked suspiciously. "No need to sleep anymore," he said with a smile. "One pill keeps you fully functional for at least 20 hours. "No way. You might need an hour or two to recover when you finally do sleep, but aside from that, it's perfect. Doesn't make your urine smell weird, doesn't mess up your hair, nothing." "No way," I repeated. Too good to be true. Devon sat down at his desk across from me, studying my face carefully. "You won't let me help you get a better job," he said. "So let me help you with this, as a friend." I could tell he was being completely genuine. You could criticize Devon for many things, but he'd always been honest with me. I swallowed my anxiety and picked up one of the pills. "I don't know, man," I said hesitantly. "There's got to be some kind of catch." "Never take more than one per day," he warned, "or you'll get seriously sick, and never more than 3 days consecutively. Maybe 4, but then you'll definitely get a splitting headache. Oh, and absolutely no other drugs." "What do you mean?" I asked. "There's a list of substances it reacts negatively with, but you don't touch that stuff anyway, so you're completely fine." "What about caffeine?" "As long as you don't go crazy." Devon picked up a small printed sheet and scanned it over, reading from the list. "And then there's a bunch of heavy narcotics listed here. Methamphetamine, cocaine, etc." "There goes my weekend plans," I joked. "Funny guy," Devon scoffed. "Look, if you don't want it, that's totally fine, but—" No, I'll try one," I interrupted. And so I did. Taking that first pill felt like surfacing after being underwater for too long. I felt lighter, but not intoxicated. I was simply well rested, prepared to tackle the day ahead. But there was also this subtle coldness to it, like an icy breath moving through my nervous system. I looked at Devon like I was seeing him clearly for the first time. He stood up and clapped his hands together enthusiastically. "I knew it," he said. "I knew this would be perfect for you." "How much do I owe you?" I asked. "For the bottle." "How much?" "Take it all," he said, grinning and pushing the entire case toward me. Guy owed me a massive favor. "Seriously? You're just giving this away?" "I'm just happy to have a real friend," he said simply. That night marked the first time I actually stayed at one of Devon's parties. for real. The man was absolutely unstoppable. He consumed shots of liquor like they were water. He knew every single food vendor on the entire block by their first names. And he'd bounce from after party to after party without even breaking a sweat. I was simply along for the ride. We ended up drunk on a rooftop watching the sunrise. Not a trace of tiredness in our eyes. Our day was only just beginning. No need for tobacco to keep us going anymore. I'd never need that stuff again. Next thing, you're gonna find yourself a woman, he mumbled contentedly. Then land an incredible job. A truly great job. You can fix everything, huh? I asked. That's exactly why I'm the boss, he replied. Listen, I don't want to owe you anything, I said seriously. You understand that, right? You don't owe me a damn thing, he insisted. Kinda feels like I do, though. He asked to see my phone. I handed it over, and he scrolled down to his contact information. He hovered his finger over the delete button. You can delete my number right now and never contact me again. That's completely your choice. Really? I asked, surprised. Really? He handed my phone back and redirected his attention to the sunrise. But for as long as you want, I'm here for you, he continued. No strings attached whatsoever. No strings, he confirmed with a shrug, sliding his final beer in my direction. It just feels good to be the good guy for once. The next day, lying in my bed, I was genuinely terrified. I had absolutely no idea how my body would react. It was a make-or-break moment where I'd discover whether Devin had completely screwed me over or actually helped me out. I had an entire case of those pills hidden in my closet, more than sufficient to keep me going for many months. But I followed his instructions carefully. Every 3 or 4 days, I'd take a break and sleep. So when I went to bed that night, I had no idea what to expect. I experienced bizarre dreams. I dreamt I woke up in this barren wasteland with a dead tree looming in the distance. There were no stars visible in the sky. It was desolate, but somehow peaceful in its own way. And I dreamt that something was there in the darkness, something actively searching for me, but I woke up long before it could find me. I was somewhat shaken, but it was just a dream. Those fleeting images faded from my mind faster than it took me to prepare breakfast. From that point forward, I committed to giving these pills a genuine shot. I would rest every 3 or 4 days, but until then, I was continuously active. I could work as many hours as I physically wanted. I could stay up all night completing projects one after another. I never missed a single call from Marcus. I could meet every demand placed on me, and I could do it all comfortably without any side effects. Sure, whenever I crashed and slept, I'd dream about that place again. The dead tree reaching toward the absent moon, the desolate ruins scattered across the landscape, and somewhere out in that eternal darkness, something was searching for me. But it never had enough time to locate me. I'd always wake up long before it could. It was comfortable, efficient, and I could accomplish absolutely everything. I had time to take on occasional work with Devin. Nothing major, just small odd jobs here and there. He was fair, but didn't pay particularly well. But then again, I was earning more money than I knew how to spend anyway. I got a second opportunity to interview with Devin's contact at the pharmaceutical research company, and this time I absolutely nailed it. It was just an entry-level data analysis position, But I could do it completely remotely, and it paid nearly 3 times what my delivery job paid. I had to improve my technical writing skills, but that wasn't a significant challenge. Marcus had saved up sufficient funds for his sound engineering courses, which gave me additional time to focus on other opportunities. I invested time in a startup application with some classmates, and we made substantial progress. Overall, life was looking remarkably good. Weeks transformed into months, and months eventually became an entire year. I still had plenty of pills remaining, and I'd established a sustainable routine. I was sleeping better when I did sleep. I was eating better, and I had so much more available time. It reached a point where I couldn't even imagine returning to life without those pills. Still, I couldn't stop wondering about that place between the waking world and my dreams. That place in the starless night with the dead tree in the distance. Who were those dark shapes wandering the fields of black sand? And what was out there looking for me? I tried not to think about it too much. I dismissed it as a strange side effect, nothing more. It wasn't affecting my daily life, so why should I care? Fast forward to 2024. I was co-founder of a small tech company. No more data analysis grunt work. We had an actual office space and 7 employees. My nickname persisted, but it had become more ironic than literal. I was no longer the guy who only showed up at the end of everything. I was leading from the front. I would strategically plan my sleep cycles in ways that nobody ever noticed. I had this reputation of working around the clock, and people simply couldn't figure out how I did it. I never shared my secret with anyone. I figured there would be serious consequences if those pills ended up in the wrong hands. My brother landed an excellent position at one of the major film studios, one of the really prestigious ones, not just any production house. It paid exceptionally well, and he could fully support himself financially. He eventually moved in with his girlfriend, and I got my own place. I could finally upgrade and get myself something truly nice. I still spent time with Devon regularly. He was the only other person on Earth who knew about the pills. He'd quit taking them, though. He found them too disruptive for maintaining a consistent schedule. He was in a serious relationship with a woman named Jasmine, and he hated going to bed without her. It was surprisingly sweet and romantic. More pills for me, though, so win-win situation. In March of 2024, my brother got married. The timing was terrible because I had this enormous project deadline approaching. So even with all my extra available time, it still wasn't sufficient. I had to do something Devon had explicitly warned me against. I had to keep going for 6 days straight, just 2 days beyond the recommended maximum of 4. But still, I figured I'd be fine. Initially, I didn't notice anything unusual. Everything functioned normally. But when I finally crashed after nearly a full week without sleep, I experienced the most horrifying nightmares of my entire life. Not only was I back in that desolate space, but I could physically feel everything. The black sand working its way into my shoes, the agonized screaming of people in torment. I'm pretty sure I heard gunfire echoing in the distance too. What minimal vegetation existed there was twisted into a midnight purple color, exactly like the purple lotus flower printed on the pill bottle caps. But this time, there wasn't just something in the darkness searching for me. No, it was actively hunting me down. I have this vivid memory of crawling through the sand near these ancient ruins, hearing something rapidly closing in on my position. Despite being sand, everything felt wet and viscous. It produced this absolutely disgusting sound, like a crowd of grown men all struggling to breathe simultaneously. I could hear it feeling its way through the ruins searching for me. And everywhere it made contact with something, there was this sizzling sound, like burning acid eating through matter. It attempted to speak. I'm certain it tried, but it couldn't form coherent words. It had too many tongues, and they were all trying to speak at the same time. Eventually, it located me. I couldn't bring myself to look at it. I couldn't breathe properly. I could sense the massive size of it without even looking as it loomed directly over me. I tried making myself as small as possible, but it didn't matter at all. It released this satisfied sigh, like someone enjoying ice-cold water on a scorching summer day. It was so incredibly pleased to have found me, and as it moved closer, I heard liquid dripping, sizzling as it hit the sand around me. There was an overpowering smell of ammonia mixed with something resembling mothballs. It made contact with my arm, and it burned straight into my skin. The pain was so intense that it shocked me awake, and when I regained consciousness, I had an actual burn. A quarter-sized black mark with necrotic flesh pulling the skin of my forearm tight, stinging with every slight movement of my muscles. That place was real. That thing had to be real. For an entire week afterward, I constantly felt like I was seconds away from death. I had a doctor examine my arm, but he couldn't make any sense of it. It presented like an acid burn, but behaved like severe frostbite. Ultimately, he had to perform a minor surgical procedure to remove the dead tissue. But overall, it would be fine. I just needed to keep it clean and properly bandaged, and accept that I'd have a nasty permanent scar. But that creature had been so incredibly vivid. Days later, I could still smell its presence. I remember this one instance when I was taking a shower and I had to shut off the water completely. I thought I heard something sizzling in the other room. Wrapped in just a towel, I cautiously peeked through the bathroom door, desperately hoping I was just being paranoid. This time, I was just being paranoid. But what about next time? I completely abandoned the pills. I was in a good place in life, and I didn't need them anymore. I'd achieved everything I'd wanted to accomplish. Sure, it would take some time to readjust to a normal sleep schedule, but I absolutely couldn't go back to that place. No wonder we weren't supposed to take more than 3 or 4 pills in succession. If I'd stayed in that nightmare realm even 1 second longer, it would have taken my entire arm. Another hour, and I'd be dead. I decided to return everything to Devon. By that point, he'd expanded his business ventures considerably, but he'd mellowed out significantly as a person. He'd become a changed man. He was engaged to Jasmine and genuinely trying to turn his entire life around. Actually, we hadn't seen each other for quite some time. He seemed somewhat surprised when I called asking to meet at his office. I met Devon at his downtown office late one Friday evening. It was a strange sensation. There were people everywhere around me, but I still felt completely isolated and alone. There was this intrusive thought crawling around in the back of my mind, whispering to me that if I slowed down and really focused, I could hear that sizzling acid sound burning into the asphalt beneath my feet. So I kept my head down and tried losing myself in the music, the heavy bass, the rhythmic beat of the party atmosphere. But it all felt superficial and meaningless. I couldn't stop thinking about that creature. Every time I heard someone cough, sneeze, or clear their throat, I thought that was it. It had found me. I could feel the wet presence of it in my ear, almost like intense heat radiating. But I forced my way through the club crowd and joined Devin in his office. I placed the pill container on his desk and sat down in the chair across from him. "I'm completely done with them," I stated firmly. "Did they do something to you?" he asked with concern. "Yeah," I confirmed. I'm just done with them." "All right, no problem at all," Devin nodded. "You doing okay though?" "Not really," I admitted honestly. Despite not hanging out for quite a while, Devin was his usual supportive self. He stored the pills away, sat down beside me, and handed me a cold beer. He'd installed a mini refrigerator next to his desk. The damn thing generated more noise than the ceiling fan. "I'm not going to press you about it," he said gently. "But you look like absolute hell." "I feel like absolute hell," I agreed. "What the hell happened to your arm?" he asked, noticing the bandage. "Frostbite," I said flatly. Devin snorted with laughter, but immediately stopped when he saw I wasn't joking. He opened his mouth to say something, but closed it again. Whatever had happened to me, he understood it was serious enough not to laugh about. Instead, he leaned forward with genuine worry in his eyes. "Forget those pills," he said firmly. "You're sticking with me from now on. We clear?" "Yeah, we're clear." He made his absolute best effort to keep me company that night. We had drinks, socialized with various people, and even did some karaoke. I nearly got into an arm wrestling match with an intoxicated Australian guy. It was genuinely nice. And for a brief moment, I didn't hear those awful sounds anymore. I didn't smell those terrible smells. Later that night, I started feeling myself growing tired. Normally, I would just pop one of the pills, but I went with a classic alternative instead: chewing tobacco. Devin and I prepared some and bit down. It felt good to experience that familiar crunch and burning sensation. It was a return to normalcy in a way. It was how things were supposed to be. By the end of the night, we ended up on that same rooftop bench, watching the sunrise. But this time, he was completely exhausted. He kept nodding off repeatedly as he waited for a friend to come pick him up. I was strangely not tired in the slightest. "Maybe you still have some of it lingering in your system," Devin mumbled sleepily. "Makes sense, right? I mean, larger doses probably take longer to fully clear out." "Probably," I agreed with a nod. "Or maybe it's just the tobacco." "Nah, tobacco doesn't work like that," he insisted. "It's a quick stimulant boost, not a sustained effect." By the time Devin's friend arrived to collect him, he could barely keep his eyes open at all. He practically collapsed into the passenger seat and looked back at me one final time. "I'm getting rid of those pills," he said with determination. "Don't worry about it. It's handled. You'll be fine." But I wasn't feeling fine at all. Or rather, I was feeling fine. But that was precisely the problem. I went home and I still couldn't fall asleep. An entire day passed and I still couldn't sleep. I hadn't taken any pills for quite some time, but I was still wide awake and fully alert. I was getting increasingly worried, but I didn't know where to turn for help. Had I accidentally taken a pill without realizing it? I reached out to Devin's contact at the pharmaceutical research company, but we couldn't discuss it through email since their communications were monitored, and this was obviously not exactly legal. So we arranged to meet downtown later that week. For the next several days, I was a complete wreck. I kept obsessing about that place and that creature. I'd been awake for so many consecutive days that I dreaded thinking about what would happen when I eventually returned there. It would be waiting for me. I could sense it, hear it in the distance. I met the man from the Pharmaceutical Research Institute early one morning. I paid for his coffee but didn't order anything for myself. He was an American in his late 50s with a completely shaved head and a neatly trimmed beard. He hid behind dark sunglasses and a black baseball cap and wasn't interested in small talk whatsoever. I decided to get straight to the point. I explained the entire situation. After taking a larger dose than recommended, I couldn't sleep anymore at all. He didn't appear particularly surprised by this information. That only happens when you combine it with other stimulants, he said matter-of-factly. Didn't he warn you about that? I haven't taken anything else, I insisted. I don't use drugs of any kind. You absolutely certain? He asked skeptically. Nothing at all. Does alcohol count? I asked. What about chewing tobacco? Wait, what? His expression suddenly changed. He stopped for a moment, his eyes looking away as he processed something. He pulled out his phone and checked some information, then nodded slowly. Chewing tobacco, he said quietly. That's extremely high in ericoline. High in what? I asked, confused. Ericoline. That's literally the very first substance on the interaction warning list. That's the absolute worst one to combine it with. Wait, what does that mean? I asked, panic rising in my voice. What's going to happen to me? He leaned forward, looking at me over the edge of his glasses with an expression of deep concern. Alkaline amplifies the pharmaceutical effect by a magnitude of approximately 100 times. That's actually one of the primary reasons they had to completely shut down the entire development program. At that level of amplification, there's absolutely no way to predict what's going to happen. Wait, 100 times? So you're going to be awake for possibly a year, maybe even 3 or 4 years, and then something will happen that I can't even begin to imagine. There was nothing else to discuss. He had no advice to offer. There were no solutions available. The damage was already done. I nearly broke down crying right there in public. My hands were trembling uncontrollably. I was going to be awake for years, and then something he couldn't even conceptualize was going to happen to me. If the effect of just 2 extra pills had caused me a burn on my arm, what the absolute hell was going to happen after 100 or 200 times that dosage? The bandage on my arm was itching intensely, and I could hear sizzling sounds coming from a nearby restaurant kitchen. But it wasn't actually from the kitchen. It was that creature, and it was patiently waiting for me. It was only a matter of time. I tried absolutely everything I could think of, but there was nothing that could be done. There was technically nothing medically wrong with me on paper. I was actually healthier than I'd ever been. In fact, the laboratory in Vietnam that the researcher mentioned had been completely shut down, and all evidence of it had been systematically dismantled. I had one vague lead about an investor in the United States, but it led absolutely nowhere. I had to sell my ownership stake in my company. It was painful, but the payout was extremely generous. It would sustain me financially for several months, possibly a year, while I desperately tried to figure something out. But it was a hopeless search for a solution that didn't exist. Even the man from the Pharmaceutical Research Institute completely vanished. And when mysterious men in dark suits started questioning my friends and family members about me, I knew I'd pushed too far trying to find answers. This all happened in March of 2024. Every single day from that point forward has been an absolute nightmare. In June of that same year, I lost the need to eat entirely. It's like my body entered some kind of suspended metabolic state. I could sit motionless in a room for days on end, staring at a blank wall, and absolutely nothing would change. I would feel nothing whatsoever. I would experience nothing at all, and I wouldn't even care. And without food, I obviously needed no bathroom breaks either. Sometime around August, I lost the need to breathe. I'd forget to do it for days at a time, and my lungs would completely deflate to the point where it became painful to attempt using them. After a couple of weeks of this, I couldn't speak without blood filling my mouth anymore. In late November of that year, I stopped blinking entirely. I'd forget to do it for extended periods, and dust would accumulate in my eyes. It didn't cause pain, but it was deeply uncomfortable to wash them out, so I eventually just started keeping my eyes closed permanently. Something happened to my skin as well. I think it stopped requiring sunlight exposure. Over the course of several days, I became so pale that you could practically see through me in certain lighting. My fingernails began falling off one by one. Without properly using my mouth and jaw, my teeth started falling out of my skull. I barely even noticed when it happened. I had to move back in with my brother so he could take care of me. He couldn't comprehend what was happening, and neither could anyone else, including medical professionals. My brother forced me to see doctors repeatedly, and they couldn't make any sense of my condition. Whenever they suggested bringing in specialists, some anonymous organization would apparently pay them substantial amounts of money to look the other way. But all of that was just surface-level physical deterioration. It was all just bodily changes. It didn't compare at all to what was happening to my thoughts and mental state. I felt myself drawing closer and closer to that dark space, that realm beyond normal reality where that creature patiently waited for me. It hungered for me specifically. All the physical needs and desires I'd lost, it had somehow gained. It was desperately hungry, exhausted, suffering from exposure, and in constant excruciating pain. And it wanted to transfer all of that back to me, to completely consume me with it. If I focused hard enough, I could hear panting sounds, like an eager dog waiting for its owner to fill its food bowl, ready to tear into me without shame or hesitation. Sometimes I forget which world I'm actually in. I'll stand up and wander around, running my hands along the walls, imagining them as crumbling ancient ruins. My brother once caught me wandering directly into traffic in the middle of the street. If my lungs had been functional, he would have heard me desperately begging that creature to leave me alone. Instead, I got hit by a car and didn't feel a single thing. I just crumpled into a pile on the side of the road like a broken doll. The things people say to me feel like distant dreams happening to someone else. I have no capacity for producing serotonin anymore, so joy and happiness are concepts from the distant past. Sometimes I can hear music and people celebrating somewhere across the city, but it feels like they're all mocking my existence. But the fear is still present. It might be the only genuine emotion that remains intact. It's 2026 now. I think I attended Devon's wedding ceremony, but I can't be completely certain. I think I was physically there. I couldn't see or hear properly anymore. I can't feel anything when I attempt to move my arms. There was a pleasant smell at some point. I think he offered me a piece of wedding cake. I tried to smile at him in response, but I have no idea if my face actually moved correctly. I've written this account with tremendous effort over several months. My brother has helped extensively. He washes my eyes periodically, and I stare at letters on a keyboard for him to type out. If I strain considerably, I can force just enough air into my lungs to produce a noise or maybe a very short word. Sometimes late at night when my brother isn't home, I think I can hear something outside the apartment, not just in my deteriorating mind, but actually on the street below. I think they're watching me closely. I think they're curious about what will happen when I finally fall asleep, or perhaps they're terrified of what will emerge. It's darkly ironic in a way. They called me Nightfall, the closing time guy. It's oddly fitting. I can't help but think I should have just followed my father's path, maintaining auto repair equipment in that faded yellow garage. I wish I could dream of seeing those walls again, even just once. I had to finish writing this in a rush. I think the pharmaceutical effect is finally wearing off, exactly like the researchers said it would. Yesterday, I yawned for the first time in years. Today, I feel genuinely tired. Good night, Los Angeles. The Price of Everything, written by Cypher Stories. What would it take for you to end someone's life? Excuse me? I asked, completely caught off guard by the question. A stranger wearing what appeared to be a very expensive suit sat down across from me at the train station bench. What would it take for you to end someone's life? He repeated calmly, as if asking about the weather. Why the hell are you asking me this? I asked, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. He leaned back casually against the bench, his posture relaxed, as if this were a perfectly normal conversation. Because I genuinely want to know, Michael, he said, his expression remaining completely neutral and unreadable. How do you know my name? I demanded, feeling a genuine chill run through my entire body. This was getting seriously creepy. Oh, who are you exactly? The stranger leaned forward deliberately and made direct eye contact. His stare was cold and absolutely unwavering. I know everything about you, Michael, he said, without offering his own name in return. I know that you're drowning in medical debt from your mother's treatment. I know you had to sell your motorcycle to make rent. I know you're living paycheck to paycheck, one emergency away from complete financial collapse. He leaned back again and looked away toward the train tracks. I want to know what it would take for you to end someone's life, he finished. This person was seriously freaking me out, and I desperately wanted to either run away or call the police immediately. But I was genuinely afraid of what he might do if I tried. He was obviously some kind of dangerous psychopath. I decided to humor him cautiously until my train arrived, just to be safe. Why would I ever end someone's life? I asked carefully. Aside from legitimate self-defense, I can't see how that could ever be justified. You're holding a weapon, and someone is kneeling helpless in front of you, he said hypothetically. What if pulling that trigger would prevent a global pandemic? Would you do it then? So, the trolley problem? I asked cautiously, recognizing the philosophical dilemma. Switching the tracks to save 1,000 people by sacrificing one innocent person? The stranger waved a dismissive hand. You could think of it that way, if you prefer, he said. But it doesn't necessarily have to be saving lives. It could be for absolutely anything you desire. Wealth beyond measure, unlimited political power, even discovering the cure for aging itself. I've always hated the trolley problem. It was always an impossible choice for me, one I could never resolve satisfactorily. I genuinely wouldn't be able to decide, I said with a shrug. Fortunately, I'll never actually face that situation. He leaned forward again, intently. But what if you do face it? He said. What if I possess the power to make it reality? This guy is completely insane, I thought to myself. You claim to have this power? I asked, exasperated. If that's true, why not do it yourself? Why would you make some random person end someone's life to cure aging or whatever? I cannot do it myself directly, he replied simply. I'm fundamentally unable to interfere in that way. I can only act when someone of their own free will and by their own hand provides me with a soul to work with. I leaned back and crossed my arms defensively. Prove it, then, I challenged him. Prove that you actually have this power you're claiming. Like I explained, I'm unable to act directly, he said patiently. However, I can prove my knowledge is beyond normal human capability. When you were 11 years old, you discovered a toad in a secluded creek. You named it Gerald. You would return there every week to visit it until one day it simply wasn't there anymore. He continued without pausing. You had an intense crush on a girl named Sarah in high school. You still think about her regularly. You want to reach out to her, but you keep putting it off indefinitely. You're planning to visit your mother's grave tomorrow, he said matter-of-factly. 3 days ago, a conversation with a coworker reminded you of her. You were going to purchase flowers later today from the shop on Madison Street. Is this demonstration satisfactory? The stranger asked calmly. I sat there completely frozen in shock. I had never told anyone about any of that. Not a single soul knew these things, except me. It was literally impossible for him to know. Yet undeniable proof was staring me directly in the face. There was absolutely no other way he could have possibly known these intimate details. It took me a long moment to find my voice again. Okay, I said shakily, my voice barely above a whisper. So you need me to end someone's life? End one person's life to benefit others somehow? What you end a life for is entirely your decision, he said. You can receive absolutely anything you wish in exchange. The stranger stood up from the bench deliberately. You have exactly 25 minutes to decide, he said, looking down at me. You will never receive this opportunity again. Consider your choice very carefully. He turned and pointed down the platform. In the maintenance area where I'm pointing, he said, you will find a person. You will also find a weapon. State your desire loudly and clearly before pulling the trigger. He lowered his hand and began walking away. Decide what you'll end a life for. Decide the price of everything. The stranger started walking away down the platform. Remember, 25 minutes, he said, his voice fading into the distance. Will you pull the trigger? I looked at my watch, then slumped back against the bench, feeling completely overwhelmed by the weight of this impossible decision. What should I do? I thought desperately. Was there actually a person in that maintenance area? A human being who would live or die based entirely on my decision? What was the price of everything? What was a life worth? I could prevent the next great plague, save millions from suffering and death. I could fund research into diseases that have plagued humanity for centuries. I could create a world with significantly less suffering overall. Just one life sacrificed to save countless millions of others. But what about wealth? I could be extraordinarily rich, never work another day in my entire life, all debts completely erased, no longer constantly struggling just to survive. A life of absolute luxury and comfort for one simple pull of the trigger. Political power. I could influence entire nations, alter the course of human history itself. Every law, every military conflict, every scientific endeavor guided by my decisions and vision. No one could stop me. Unlimited potential achieved by removing just one person's existence. My thoughts were racing out of control. But what about the person I would end? Did they have family members who loved them? Close friends who would mourn them? Were they just like me, with their own hopes and aspirations and dreams for the future? Their entire existence gone with one bullet. It would be my fault entirely. It would be my decision that they should die. Their innocent blood would stain my hands forever. 18 minutes had passed already. Do the ends justify the means? Should I end this person's life for the greater good? Or do the means justify the ends? Should I let them live regardless of the consequences? I kept glancing toward that maintenance area. I had never been so stressed in my entire life. I could barely form coherent thoughts. I had to make a decision. I had to decide right now. I suddenly jumped up and started walking toward the maintenance area. There was no real choice here. I had to do this. The world would be objectively better in exchange for one single life. My steps carried me closer to my destination. It had to be done. There was no other way. I would make absolutely certain they were remembered forever as a hero, someone who unknowingly saved the world through their sacrifice. Just do it. Keep walking forward. Just get there. My heart was physically aching, tearing itself apart inside my chest. Get there. Pull the trigger. Just end it. My legs felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds each and carrying an entire life's worth of consequences. I struggled to keep moving forward. I was almost there now. I have to do this. I have to. Roughly 12 feet from the maintenance area entrance, my legs completely gave out beneath me. I collapsed to my knees on the concrete platform. Tears started rolling down my face uncontrollably. I couldn't breathe properly. I looked down at my trembling hands. They were blurry through my tears, shaking so violently I couldn't control them. It was too much. I can't do it, I whispered, openly sobbing. I can't do it. I can't end someone's life. I couldn't take an innocent person's life, someone innocent, for a world they would never get to experience or see. My decision was final. I would not pull that trigger. Trying desperately to control my trembling hands, I pulled out my phone and dialed emergency services. It was absolutely clear to me in that moment. Some things truly cannot be measured or assigned value. The worth of a human life. Shortly after the police arrived at the station, they couldn't locate the mysterious stranger I'd been speaking with. They did, however, discover someone in the maintenance area. Someone holding a weapon, waiting specifically for me to arrive. Something in the mountains pretending to be human. Written by Silent Watcher 93. The bus ride into the mountains was long and eerily quiet. I spent most of it either staring out the window at the passing forest or drifting in and out of restless sleep. I was the final passenger remaining aboard after other riders had gradually departed at small mountain towns along the route. The bus suddenly came to an abrupt halt, and a visibly distressed man climbed aboard. He stumbled unsteadily down the aisle, sat down across from me, and immediately began writing frantically in a worn, leather-bound journal. He appeared older, probably in his late 60s, with an exhausted look about him, wearing well-used and noticeably dirty hiking equipment. He spent the entire remaining ride either writing intensely or flipping through previous pages. Roughly an hour before my scheduled stop, the bus driver called out loudly, "Cascade Ridge National Park Ranger Station." The man abruptly jumped up and rushed toward the front of the bus. He searched through his pockets frantically, then slapped some loose coins onto the fare collection tray before darting off the bus without uttering a single word. Sometime later, the bus driver announced my stop. As I was preparing to exit, I noticed that the man from earlier had, in his obvious hurry, left his journal on the seat directly behind the driver's position. I figured I'd keep it secure. If I encountered him again somewhere on the trail system, I could return it to him, or I could simply hand it over to the park rangers on my way back to civilization. The hiking trail was completely empty except for the occasional deer or rabbit darting between the massive trees. I spent hours simply listening to the satisfying crunch of fallen leaves under my boots, various bird calls echoing through the canopy, and the constant rustle of pine needles and branches. As the sun gradually crept closer to the western horizon, I figured it was time to establish my camp for the night. I located a suitable flat spot next to a small mountain stream and began unpacking my backpack. I set up my tent, gathered sufficient firewood from the surrounding area, and boiled water from the stream to rehydrate a freeze-dried camping meal. The sun finally dipped completely below the horizon, and the temperature began dropping noticeably. I tucked myself into my sleeping bag, but I couldn't shake this persistent urge I'd been trying to ignore all evening long. I glanced over at the journal sitting half buried in the open top of my pack. I reached for it and flipped to the first few pages. The handwriting was compact, but surprisingly neat and legible. It started off exactly like any typical trail journal would. Short entries documenting trail conditions, brief notes about the weather patterns, and a few surprisingly detailed sketches of wildflowers. One entry even described a coyote encounter in surprisingly poetic and descriptive detail. I had just turned to another page when I suddenly heard a voice call out from the darkness. "Hello, anyone there?" I slowly unzipped my tent and cautiously poked my head out. In the dim glow of the dying campfire embers, I could just barely make out the outline of a man standing several meters away from my tent. "Sorry to bother you at this hour," the man said apologetically. "I noticed your campfire from a distance. Would you mind if I set up my tent here? It's getting quite late, and I'd rather not stumble around in complete darkness looking for another suitable spot." Out here in the wilderness, hospitality felt less like a personal choice and more like an unspoken survival rule everyone followed. "Sure, plenty of space available," I answered somewhat hesitantly. He crouched down and began stirring the fire pit with a practiced, experienced hand. With just a few quick, efficient motions, he coaxed the dying embers back into actual flames. The fire blazed brighter than it had been all evening, crackling and alive again, pushing back the surrounding shadows and fully illuminating his facial features. He appeared to be in his mid-50s, almost completely bald, with just small patches of gray hair clinging to his scalp, with dark circles under his eyes and several days' worth of stubble on his jaw. His clothes were absolutely covered in dried mud and dirt. He smiled faintly in my direction. "Hope you don't mind the company," he said, glancing up at me briefly. He lowered himself onto a flat rock across the fire from me and warmed his hands over the flames. "My name is Daniel," he said after a brief moment of silence. "You been out here long?" I'm Chris," I replied. "First day out here, actually. How about you?" "Long enough," he replied, with a slight chuckle that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Well, I don't want to keep you awake all night." I crawled back into my sleeping bag as he methodically pitched his tent right next to mine. The last thing I observed before I drifted off to sleep was his silhouette, sitting perfectly motionless by the fire, staring into the flames. "Morning," I mumbled groggily. Stepping out of my tent into the cool mountain air, a small metal kettle of water was already hissing quietly on a makeshift grate positioned over the flames. "I didn't hear you get up at all." He glanced at me with what seemed like a practiced smile. "Got up before dawn and figured I'd heat some water for your morning coffee." I froze in place. "How do you know I drink coffee in the mornings?" "I recognized the distinct acidic scent on your breath yesterday evening," he said, his tone remaining completely nonchalant. "Figured you'd probably want the water ready and waiting. Some habits are remarkably hard to miss." I rummaged through my pack and pulled out the small container of instant coffee. "Well, I've got some granola bars too, if you want some for breakfast." Daniel shook his head politely. "Thanks for the offer, but I've already eaten." He poured the hot water into 2 metal cups, and I stirred some powdered coffee into mine. I reached over to pour some coffee powder into Daniel's cup, but he quickly lifted his cup of plain hot water to his mouth and drank the entire thing in one continuous motion. Perhaps he just prefers plain hot water, I thought to myself, though it seemed strange. Breakfast finished, we extinguished the fire properly and efficiently packed up both tents and all our gear. The morning sunlight filtered through the towering trees, casting long, dramatic shadows across the forest floor. I unfolded my topographic map and compass and started plotting a course to the next designated campsite when I suddenly felt Daniel place his hand firmly on my shoulder. "I know the way," he said, simply and confidently. There was no arrogance in his tone whatsoever, only an absolute certainty that left no room for discussion or debate. The mountain air was crisp and clean, and birds called sporadically from the treetops high above us. Daniel moved with a practiced ease that made it abundantly clear he was more than comfortable in this environment, navigating around rocks and steep inclines without any hesitation whatsoever. We hiked for hours in near-complete silence. Curiously, Daniel deliberately fell back to walk behind me, occasionally offering directions or making comments about my footing technique. At first, I thought he might simply be giving me some personal space, but I couldn't shake this uncomfortable feeling that he either wanted to watch me constantly or specifically didn't want me watching him. The forest seemed to respond strangely to our passage through it. The rustle of leaves became noticeably quieter, and the birds that had been greeting the morning had gone completely silent. Eventually, the biological urge to urinate forced me to set my backpack down, and I walked behind a large nearby tree for privacy. When I returned to my pack, I immediately noticed the main compartment zipper was pulled open just slightly, maybe an inch. "Need anything from my pack?" I asked Daniel directly, trying to keep my voice neutral. "I just checked your compass to make sure we're still heading the right direction," he replied casually, not wanting to antagonize my new hiking companion out here in the middle of absolute nowhere. I gave him a small nod of acknowledgement, and we continued forward. The trail gradually widened into a clearing, and the next designated campsite lay directly ahead. I unpacked my tent while Daniel constructed the fire pit with practiced, efficient motions. "Here, let me help you with that," Daniel said quietly and approached me. He grabbed several tent stakes and drove them deep into the dirt using just his bare, flat palm. Seeing my obvious surprise at this, he patted my back firmly, his hand feeling unnaturally cold even through the fabric of my shirt. He returned to the fire, sitting perfectly still and watching me with unnervingly attentive eyes that barely seemed to blink. As we waited for water to boil for our evening meal, I retrieved the leather-bound journal from my backpack. As I flipped it open to continue reading, I noticed Daniel's eyes widen very slightly, a brief flicker of recognition that vanished as quickly as it had appeared. He immediately shifted back into his usual posture, hands resting casually on his knees, and fixed his gaze intently on the dancing flames. Settling back comfortably against a log, I flipped to where I'd left off the previous evening and continued reading. October 11th, 2025. We made excellent time reaching the first campsite, arriving well before sunset. A great start to our planned 6-day loop hike. Clear sky, gentle wind from the northwest. A gunshot woke me up sometime after midnight. Daniel's sleeping bag was completely empty. I called out for him repeatedly and received absolutely no response. He emerged from the darkness several minutes later. He claimed he'd had to fire a warning shot to scare off a bear that was lurking dangerously close to our camp. We'll thoroughly examine the surrounding area first thing tomorrow morning, October 12th, 2025. Nothing appeared out of the ordinary around the immediate camp area. Found some tracks, but definitely not from a bear. Daniel has been mostly silent today. Says he slept very poorly last night. Air felt heavy with approaching thunderclouds on the horizon, but the storm never actually materialized. Trail conditions mostly dry and manageable. October 13th, 2025. I haven't observed Daniel eat or drink anything since yesterday morning. He completely waved off breakfast at the stream. He never refilled his water bottle. At lunch, he insisted he wasn't hungry at all. Maybe he's feeling nauseous or sick. I tried bringing up some old shared stories from previous hikes we'd taken together. He seemed oddly curious, like it was the very first time he'd heard any of them. He didn't add details or correct minor inaccuracies the way he always does naturally. He just sat there, watching the firewood slowly collapse into glowing coals. Otherwise, conditions were very humid, and a full moon helped illuminate the forest throughout the night. October 14th, 2025. I woke up twice during the night. Daniel was still awake both times, just sitting there motionless. I don't think he even noticed me watching him. I decided to directly confront him this morning about his increasingly strange behavior. He just sat there completely expressionless, not responding at all. I've noticed that his reactions always come approximately 1 second too late, like he's actively trying to calculate how he should respond appropriately to normal human interaction. His skin looks distinctly different now too. New wrinkles appearing, a slight yellowish tone developing, and his hair has started falling out in small clumps. My only logical explanation is that something in the environment, might have poisoned him somehow. October 15th, 2025. It doesn't eat. It doesn't sleep. It doesn't blink its eyes. There is absolutely no soul visible behind those eyes. It just sits motionlessly by the fire and watches everything. I cut a large opening in the back of my tent using my knife. Tonight, I'm leaving this campsite. I'm running. I looked up slowly from the journal and met Daniel's eyes directly across the crackling fire. For a long, tense moment, neither of us moved even slightly. Then, without breaking eye contact for even a second, he said with perfect calmness, "The water is ready now." My hand shook noticeably as I fumbled with a package of freeze-dried beef and poured in the hot water. The plastic packaging crinkled loudly in the oppressive silence between us. Daniel shifted very slightly, the firelight flickering across his increasingly strange-looking face. He opened a small pack of beef jerky, picked out individual pieces of meat with his bare, visibly dirty fingers, rinsed off the seasoning in the boiling water, and swallowed each piece completely whole without chewing. After some time passed, he finally spoke again. "These mountains are ancient. They contain stories, if you know how to properly listen to them." "What kind of stories?" I asked cautiously, being very careful not to let my growing unease show in my voice. "Well, there's one particular story about a creature that's existed here longer than any map or established trail. Most people dismiss it as just a local legend, but I've personally seen signs that strongly suggest otherwise." He leaned forward slightly, and for just a brief moment, his face held what might have been an expression of genuine sorrow. "They say a very long time ago, there was a man who lived not far from these very mountains, a hunter by trade, exceptionally clever and physically strong, but with an insatiable hunger inside him that no normal food could ever satisfy. He began hunting not deer, not elk, but other people, travelers, wanderers, anyone foolish enough to venture too far into these mountains alone. He consumed their flesh, wore their skin as disguises, and believed himself to be above all laws of both men and nature. For his unspeakable crimes, God, or perhaps something even older than God, cursed him to walk these mountains forever, never resting, never truly belonging anywhere. To torment him even further, they say he was given a terrible gift. He gained the ability to take the physical shape of any man or woman and wear any face he desired convincingly." Daniel stirred the fire methodically with a long stick. "No matter how much he studied them, how perfectly he learned to laugh, how convincingly he learned to cry, or how well he could tell their personal stories, something always inevitably betrayed his true nature. His reflection would appear subtly wrong. His eyes remained completely void of any human soul. And when people finally noticed these inconsistencies, when they looked too closely at him, well, he had no choice but to feed again." He paused deliberately, letting the silence fill the entire clearing around us. "They say he still walks these mountains endlessly, constantly listening, continuously learning, desperately hoping that someone will finally mistake him for an actual human being." "Huh. Yeah, that's quite a spooky story," I muttered, no longer able to meet his penetrating gaze. My mind was racing frantically. Should I make some kind of move right now? Should I bolt into the forest immediately and risk being caught in complete darkness? Or should I stay here and act like absolutely nothing had changed? Every survival instinct I possessed was screaming at me to run as fast as possible. Yet my body remained frozen in place like a statue, completely unable to move. I studied the features of my companion more carefully now, and with every glance, my stomach twisted tighter with dread. His skin was unnaturally pale and patchy, loose and sagging in some places, while stretched far too tightly over bone in others, yellowed with distinct hints of purple bruising appearing around his neck area. It looked as though his skin had begun the very early stages of decomposition. Even his breathing pattern seemed completely wrong, far too shallow and far too deliberate, as though he were carefully measuring and controlling the exact amount of air in each calculated inhale. And yet somehow, I had been completely blind to the obvious truth staring me directly in the face this entire time. I clenched my hands into tight fists to prevent the shaking from becoming visible, forced myself to breathe as evenly as possible, and desperately tried to keep my facial expression completely neutral and natural. My mind raced frantically, trying to find the right words, searching for any way to break this suffocating tension. I rubbed my eyes tiredly, faked a convincing yawn, and mumbled something vague about turning in early for the night, desperately hoping that my voice didn't reveal the absolute dread that had solidified inside my chest like ice. Just as my mind had started consciously picking apart all the inconsistencies in his human disguise, I couldn't help but wonder with growing terror if he could do exactly the same thing to me. I slipped into my tent and pulled the zipper closed with slow, careful hands. My fingers shook as I unfolded my topographic map, the paper crackling far too loudly in the silence. I traced the lines with a trembling finger, estimating the nearest paved road at approximately 45 kilometers away. The major problem was that I couldn't even be certain of our exact current location, having blindly followed Daniel's lead the entire day without paying proper attention. It was also at minimum a full day's trek in broad daylight, let alone attempting it in the middle of the night, but it was the only possible chance I had of surviving. Essential items only: flashlight, compass, map, knife, water bottle, energy bars, waterproof matches, and the journal. I stuffed them all into a small drawstring bag that usually contained my sleeping bag. Compelled by the dire warnings in the journal entries, I carefully drew my knife from its sheath. I gripped the knife handle with both hands to steady it properly and pressed the sharp steel blade into the tense nylon tent material until it parted with a faint hissing sound. I eased myself through the narrow slit, every rustle of the fabric sounding thunderous to my hypersensitive ears, and slipped into the darkness just beyond the firelight. The forest stretched endlessly in every direction. The only sounds were my ragged, panicked breathing and the thunderous pounding of my heartbeat in my ears. Beneath those sounds, faint at first, there was something else, a low murmuring at the very edge of hearing, like someone whispering unintelligibly in the distance. As I ran blindly forward, the sound gradually grew into the unmistakable rush of flowing water. The river was significantly wider than I'd hoped it would be. The moonlight glinted off the surface, creating silver streaks that broke into fragments where the current churned violently. I hesitated at the riverbank, weighing whether to wade directly through the freezing water or waste precious time searching for a safer way around. Then, a sudden crash echoed from the exact direction I had come from. Twigs snapping loudly, branches splintering. Something was moving extremely fast and coming straight toward my position. I ripped the drawstring bag from my shoulders and hurled it with all my strength across the river. It landed with a heavy thud on the gravel on the far shore. I stepped into the water immediately. The cold was instant and absolutely brutal, stabbing like thousands of needles up my legs. The powerful current nearly swept me completely off my feet. It wrenched my left boot loose from my foot and dragged it rapidly downstream. I waded desperately toward a massive tangle of driftwood caught against some large rocks. My body pressed hard against the slick, slimy wood as I slowly submerged myself until only my eyes remained above the surface. I forced myself to stay completely still. Every single muscle locked rigid. It emerged from the trees, moving on all fours, its limbs bending in completely impossible directions, moving with an unnatural elasticity that defied human anatomy. Its spine was arched grotesquely, inverted like some kind of demonic contortionist. Daniel's head was twisted completely around backward on its own neck, with his eyes staring directly forward. It waded into the river, coming straight toward my hiding spot. Each step was deliberate and calculated, like a predator closing in on cornered prey. It stopped abruptly and jerked unnaturally upright, like a dog suddenly catching an interesting scent. It sniffed the air methodically and slowly tilted its head downstream. In a sudden blur of inhuman motion, it bolted in that direction, thrashing through the water with a speed that defied anything remotely human or natural. I dragged myself from the freezing water and stumbled onto the far shore. I collapsed for a moment on the gravel, heaving desperately for air. I slowly managed to stand upright, hoisted the drawstring bag over my shoulder, and staggered into the trees. My left foot, now protected by only a soaking wet wool sock, hurt intensely with every single misstep. Sharp jolts of pain shot up my leg as I stepped on pointed rocks or sharp twigs. I leaned heavily against a tree and slid down until my back rested firmly against the rough bark. I desperately needed warmth and dry clothing, but lighting a campfire would obviously act as a beacon directly to my location. Hands shivering uncontrollably, I fumbled through my bag and pulled out the leather-bound journal. I held it flat to illuminate the pages with the help of the moonlight as I flipped to the next entry. October 16th, 2025. Humans evolved to be expert pattern recognition machines. Our brains expend tremendous energy analyzing faces in real time, constantly monitoring them. Mouth curvature, the precise cadence of blinking, the subtle shift of pupil dilation. Most people don't consciously notice this process. It's completely unconscious and automatic. But when even a single detail doesn't fit the expected pattern, something ancient and primal deep inside us immediately rebels. It's an instinct honed over hundreds of thousands of years, specifically designed to protect us from threats disguised as allies. If someone is reading this journal, don't make the same fatal mistake I did. It has spent centuries, maybe even millennia, perfecting its disguise because it desperately craves the only thing it can never truly become: a human being. Don't break the illusion it's created. Not for a single second, not even in your private thoughts. I pushed myself painfully off the tree, every joint stiff and protesting, and started walking carefully. I forced my steps to be as silent and careful as possible. I waded back across the river at a shallower point. My destination was just a short distance away now. On the riverbank, I discovered a clear trail of broken branches and disturbed earth, and I followed them until I saw a faint glow flickering between the trees ahead. The campsite looked entirely unchanged. The familiar silhouettes of both tents stood exactly where we had pitched them, but there was absolutely no sign of Daniel anywhere. I stripped off my soaked clothes, hung them over a low branch, and dug out a dry set from my bag. I sat down next to the campfire and stretched out my hands to absorb the warmth. A subtle shift in the air prickled uncomfortably on the back of my neck, and I heard the distinct clicking sounds of joints snapping back into their proper places, one by one. "I have something I've wanted to tell you," I said, breaking the silence. "I found this journal on the bus ride here." My thumb traced the worn spine as I spoke. "I think you know exactly who it belongs to. Perhaps you could return it to its rightful owner for me." Daniel stepped out of the darkness surrounding the campsite. His neck was severely bruised, and the stretched remnants of his face, pulled in too many unnatural directions, sagged down, partially covering his eyes and mouth. He looked at me from across the dancing flames, then slowly sat down on the opposite side. He took the journal from my outstretched hand and placed it on the ground next to him, dismissively. He then stretched out his other hand, holding something. "Found your boot," he said casually. I stared down at the dirty sock protecting my foot for a long moment, then forced myself to look up to meet his eyes directly. "Thanks. I appreciate it," I managed. "Must have slipped off your foot in the river," Daniel said casually, as if this were a completely normal situation. "I was unlucky," I said carefully. "Unlucky?" Daniel repeated slowly, as if tasting the word in his mouth for the first time. "No, you're actually lucky. Lucky I found it for you. How would we possibly finish our hike properly if you couldn't walk correctly?" Every single movement now felt like a performance under intense scrutiny. Every blink, every word I spoke, every facial expression had to appear completely natural. Too fast, too slow, too obviously rehearsed, and the fragile illusion I had carefully mended for him would shatter completely. "You should get some sleep," Daniel stated matter-of-factly. "The last section of trail will be the most physically difficult." Grateful for the sudden opportunity to exit, I gave him a small nod and slipped into my tent. But sleep absolutely wouldn't come. I lay awake for hours, listening intently and waiting for something to happen. Morning eventually arrived, and I emerged from the tent to find Daniel sitting in exactly the same position where I had left him. Though something was distinctly different, the item that had potentially kept me alive was gone. As we packed up the tents for the final time, I spotted the now blackened and gray remnants of leather and paper in the fire pit. The trail was extremely uneven and littered with slippery rocks, wet from overnight dew. Concentrating intensely on each careful step gave me a brief mental reprieve from the predator I could feel stalking just a few paces behind me. As I finally stepped out of the tree line and onto the paved road, the footsteps behind me abruptly disappeared completely. I turned and looked back into the dark woods I had spent the weekend trapped in. The only traces of him were four-legged prints pressed deeply into the dirt right beside my own boot prints. My mind replayed every single moment of the last few days, like a nightmare I couldn't shake as I waited for my ride back to civilization. The bus rumbled as it pulled away from the stop. I leaned back in my seat, the window cool against my temple, and let out a slow, shaky breath. After a while, I slipped a hand into my jacket pocket and felt something dry and brittle. Charred scraps of paper rested in my hand. The edges were blackened and fragile, but the writing was still partially legible. I took out my phone and opened a blank note. I'm doing my absolute best to document everything that happened while the memories are still vivid and fresh in my mind. And all right, everyone, that wraps up some disturbing Reddit horror stories. Would you like to see more videos like this in the future? If you would, please comment down below your thoughts, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, follow me on Instagram, and follow me on Spotify. It means the world to me. I genuinely appreciate all your support. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end of the video. It helps tremendously. And comment down below if you'd like to see longer videos, shorter videos, or this same length format. I read every single comment, so please share your thoughts below. Check out some other videos on the channel while you're here. I appreciate you all watching, and this has been another edition of Disturbing Stories. I'll see you next time. Take care.